Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! So a few decades back, I was involved with a group of guys with a little money and we wanted something substantial to invest in. We decided to buy a restaurant franchise. I will not even say what kind, as Zach could identify me. Well, everything was going along swimmingly until my partners backed out. I unfortunately was the face of the group and my signature was on the bottom line. So I got stuck with running the place. It soon became apparent that there are a lot of inconsistencies. The big number one was that the sales in the prospectus were nowhere near what was being generated. Then there were other things. Customers calling for their regular order. Well, it turned out that my particular franchise had been used for the past several years to deal grass and various drugs. The former manager had made some serious coin and was not happy that I had purchased his place. Well, life is not fun when you have just sunk 6 figures and the likelihood is that you have flushed it down the toilet. However, I was not going to be trifled with. First, I called the accounting firm who signed off on the prospectus. The partner in charge was taken aback. They had never signed off. I presented myself in their offices and spent the next few hours with them and their attorney. Their name could not be associated with something fraudulent. Next, I wanted my money back, and the chief franchisor told me that they would immediately put mine up for sale, but the market was not quite as high as it was when I bought it, less than 3 months previously. Then a jerk had the audacity to demand that I paid up for my last order from the commissary. Something else to consider. I took the price list provided by the central commissary that we, as franchisees, were compelled to use. Buying fruits, vegetables, cheese, and meat from outside the system will be accompanied by fines from the franchisor. I marched myself back to the accounting firm and asked for a bit of analysis. Turns out commissary prices were from 10 to 300% higher than markets. In other words, the franchisor was not interested in food, they were interested in turning around franchises. Well, that little report found its way into the hands of 20 local franchisees. Suddenly, the central commissary was not being used. The district managers start showing up writing fines. Turns out the district manager is a guy who was supplying the manager of my franchise. I have him on discarded VHS security tape selling. So I take the tapes to the accounting firm for secure storage. Then I go to the franchisor's offices. I lay it on the line. Then I have their district guy selling drugs in my restaurant. They laugh at me until I tell them that I'm the one who supplied the report to the rest of the franchisees. Oh, and by the way, we are starting an action against you. I then showed them that we had placed liens on a building they owned, their commissary, their homes, and their vehicles. I said I have enough to put you guys in jail. So these mental giants sit me down, write up a little release, and go get me a certified check for every dime I put into the franchise. I agreed to the release. However, they do not realize that the gouging and the evidence is still in the hands of others. All they succeeded in doing was get me out of the list of owners suing them. Well, the case came to court, and who do you think was on the stand giving a complete rundown? Well, one of them stood up in court and said, "Didn't we pay you to shut up? No, you refunded me the money you stole." Now they had 19 other guys taking them apart. I heard that one of the franchisors cried when they took his Porsche. His wife left him soon thereafter. This happened about a year ago. I had just returned from a business-related trip to the frozen north, Canada, of which I had been gone for about 8 months. During this time, my wife had kept me apprised of everything going on in the neighborhood, as well as her suspicion that our new neighbors behind us, henceforth known as DDN for drug-dealing neighbors, were dealing drugs. Since I'm all about keeping my family safe, I installed security cameras all around and inside my house. Most of my neighbors were perfectly fine with the cameras and a few asked if I could set theirs up if they bought them. But those drunk-dealing neighbors, however, was not pleased. He waited until I was heading out to my car and confronted me, demanding that I take them down. Hey, take those freaking cameras down. I don't need no one knowing my ass. No, they are watching my property. Can't see into your yard at all. Man, screw you. Take those stuff down or I will. If I ever see you on my property, you will leave in a body bag, I tell him. At this point, I know my wife's suspicions were well-founded. I watched the camera feeds and started noting that he had a lot of quick visitors around 3 a.m. Cars would pull up in front of my driveway, he'd meet them, exchanges were made, and the cars would leave. Not too long after, I got a motion alert on two of my cameras, and my dog started going nuts. I saw my front door handle move. It's go time. I grabbed my shotgun and rushed to the front door, but as soon as I tried opening it, my beagle tried bolting outside howling at the trespassers. Unable to deal with him and properly hold a 12 gauge, I opted to keep my dog and yelled at the two men standing there to get the heck off my property. That night, my motorcycle was stolen. They broke the locks off, and every camera on the ground floor had to be repositioned/replaced. I checked the footage and watched as a jerk neighbor walked up to them and hit them. I was done being a bystander. I contacted the police, but even with security footage, they claimed there was nothing they could do. I was furious. I knew who did it, had the proof, and there was nothing I could do about it yet. For the next couple days, I studied municipal and building codes. I started filling report after report on my jerk neighbor. Broken down cars in the yard, that's a violation. Broken gutters hanging off the roof, that's a violation. Barking dogs after 10 p.m., that's a violation. I nickel and dimed them for anything I could, hoping to goad them into doing something. I put tainted gas in a gas can on the back of my Jeep, which was unsurprisingly stolen, and suddenly their dirt bike engine blew up the next night. The jerk neighbor confronted me again, threatening that if the complaints didn't stop, he couldn't guarantee my dogs or my wife will be safe. Heated words were exchanged and he stormed up to me, and the encounter ended with weapons drawn and both of us going back inside our homes. Finally, the coup de grace. Remember the security footage of the jerk's neighbor late-night visitors? Well, I filed a report with the Counter-Narcotics Division and included everything. License plate numbers, car models, and colors, all the information I gathered for the past few months. They got enough security footage for a search warrant, and the other evidence made sure it wasn't a friendly visit. I got to watch the security cameras as SWAT descended on their house, and I got to see the jerk neighbor and everyone else was led out in handcuffs. I later found out that the dogs I had called about were being bred and used as bait dogs. The police confiscated a small arsenal and enough drugs that those jerks won't be out of jail until I'm retired. Short backstory. I'm suffering from social anxiety, and the key element to this story is I hate when strangers touch me. I get really uncomfortable/freaked out by it. That and the fact that I did take a couple self-defense classes a couple of years ago. Not too much, but enough to know how to strike a punch. So this story happens in a local go-to discount store. The dress code is a blue polo with the store's logo in a big yellow font on the back and a small logo on the front. It really should not be hard to spot when someone is an employee. I was wearing a classic white shirt at the time, not remotely any hue of blue, and no bright yellow name tag on. Anyway, I was casually browsing the store, putting stuff in a cart I was carrying with me. At some point, I decided that I don't really want this random item, so naturally, I go to put it back, because I'm a decent human being that doesn't leave stuff flying around randomly. And in comes the angry witch. She proceeds to first snap her fingers and say something along the lines of, "Hey you, come over here." Like so many others on this post, I ignore her, thinking she isn't talking to me because why would she? I am obviously not an employee. Turns out this witch didn't like this. At one point, I walk away from her toward the registers to pay for my goods. As I'm walking away, she proceeds to walk up behind me, grab me by the shoulder, yell something like, How dare you, blah blah blah, I'm a self-entitled witch, yada yada yada, you shouldn't ignore me, squee squee squee, and spin me around. As I mentioned, I'm a no touchy guy, and I'm not saying what I did is necessarily okay, but I acted on pure instinct from what I learned in self-defense. Mid-spin around, I yell, back off, as loud as I can. A good tactic to use if you're being assaulted or harassed, as it works as a deterrent factor for the assailant because you're not an easy target, and it also draws people's attention, thus giving you witnesses, and proceeds to give a mixture of a shove and a punch. The result of the punch was a woman falling flat on her butt and proceeding to yell even more obscure things. What the actual heck are you doing, lady? What the? Did you just punch a paying customer? I demand to talk to your manager right now. What? I don't work here. What? You filthy liar, you just assaulted me. I'll have you fired and arrested. Luckily, a manager was actually in the same aisle as we were in. Why she didn't ask him is beyond me. He's wearing the name tag, and I guess he heard the shouting cause, well, he came rushing over. What's going on here? He asks. Your crabby employee just ignored me and then proceeded to assault me completely unprovoked. I demand that you fire him and call the police. Lady, I told you I don't work here. You assaulted me. Of course I'm going to defend myself. Man, this man doesn't work here. Of course he is. He was putting things back on the shelves. He still doesn't work here. Never has either as far as I know. I still demand that you call the police. The manager gave me a knowing look and a smile. Turns out the store has CCTV cameras pointing just down this aisle. Well, ma'am, I'll be happy to call the police for you. I am sure that they will be here soon. I say, look man, I really just want to buy my stuff and go home. You're not going anywhere. You assaulted me. You're lucky I am going to the police instead of beating you. Mature, wow, who would have imagined? Long story short, the manager called the police and two nice gentlemen in uniforms were with us within 10 minutes asking what happened. The angry witch proceeds to give the story about how I completely ignored her because she had a question, and that I then proceeded to hit her and kick her. What? I shoved her out of the way. And I then tell my story where she keeps screaming about how I'm a filthy liar and she's a poor victim because she's a woman and all other sorts of crap. The manager tells us he can quickly pull up the footage from the CCTV cameras, and the police were more than eager to see it. About 5 minutes later, we're all standing in the back looking at the footage. The officer says, well lady, it does look like you assaulted him, and he simply defended himself. I didn't spot him either punching or kicking you. This results in arguing that would most likely be flagged for excessive foul language, and is just one giant mess of a discussion between her and the officers. I guess it can be summarized that she had a moment, and it ends with her lunging at one of the officers. Looks like she was going to slap him or something, and she got arrested and was taken back to the station with them. The crazy woman has been banned from the store as well. Apparently, attempting to assault an officer isn't very popular with said officer. The crazy woman has been banned from the store as well, and I was then free to go, and got a free coupon for approximately $35 for the store, which was more than the total I was buying for. So, I was quite happy with that. So let me tell you about this insane day I had last summer. My son Jamie, he's 12 and uses a wheelchair because of a rare muscle condition. He's the sweetest kid you could meet, always smiling, you know? We decided to hit the local pool because it was one of those scorchers and Jamie loves the water. It makes him feel free, I guess. We got there and it was packed. I mean, kids running around, parents lounging with those big hats and sunglasses. You get the picture. I found a nice spot near the kiddie pool where Jamie could watch the other kids play. I was setting up our stuff and Jamie was just beside me, humming some tune he heard on TV. Out of nowhere, this woman comes storming through the crowd. A real piece of work, this one. Short blonde hair, sunglasses perched so high on her head, they might as well be in orbit. And that's I want to speak to your manager, Aura. She was like a bulldozer in a flower shop, shoving past kids and parents alike. And that's when it happened. She reached where we were, and Jamie was kind of in her way. Just a little bit. But instead of asking nicely for him to move, she starts yelling, "Move out of the way, kid!" Jamie was startled and he couldn't move fast enough. Before I could even react, she kicked his wheelchair. I mean, who does that? The chair tipped over and Jamie fell right into the pool. My heart just stopped. I dropped everything and dove in, clothes and all. Thank God I was a decent swimmer. Jamie was struggling trying to stay afloat, but he was panicking. I got to him in time, thank God, then pulled him back to the edge. Some people helped me lift him out, and he was coughing and scared, but he was okay. That's all I cared about. But then I looked up and there she was, this entitled woman, still ranting about how we ruined her day. My blood was boiling. I mean, she could have drowned my boy. Without thinking, I marched over to her, and bam! I hit her straight in the face. Not my proudest moment, I admit, but she fell like a sack of potatoes. Right there, 2 of her teeth gone. The whole place went silent. I was shaking, my fists clenched, ready for whatever came next. And that's when the sirens wailed in the distance. The police showed up pretty quickly along with the EMTs. They checked on Jamie first, making sure he was okay. He was shaken but physically fine. I was relieved. Then they turned to the woman who was now sitting up, holding her mouse, and screaming about pressing charges. One of the officers, a tall guy, came over to me. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to explain what happened here." I told him everything, from the moment we arrived to her kicking Jamie's wheelchair. I was expecting the worst, getting handcuffed right there in front of my son, but then something unexpected happened. Turns out several people had recorded the whole incident on their phones. They showed the officers how she kicked Jamie's chair, how he fell into the pool, and how I had reacted. The officer watched the videos and nodded. He turned to the woman, who was still being dramatic, and said, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault and endangering the welfare of a child." Her face went from angry red to ghost white in a second. They handcuffed her and took her away. An officer stayed behind to take our statements. He was really kind, especially to Jamie, telling him he was brave and all. After all the commotion died down and the woman was taken away, people came to us asking if we were okay, offering towels and water. Jamie, bless his heart, just smiled and said he was fine. The rest of the day was a blur. We went home, dried off, and just cuddled on the couch, watching Jamie's favorite cartoons. I kept replaying the day in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But every time I came to the same conclusion. I did what I had to do to protect my son. That woman, she got what was coming to her. I heard later that she was charged and had to do community service, plus anger management classes. Serves her right if you ask me. Jamie and I haven't been back to that pool since. We found a quieter one a bit further away, but it's peaceful, and Jamie loves it just the same. He still talks about bad days sometimes, but not with fear. He says it's the day he knew his mom was a superhero. And me? Well, I'm just glad he's safe. That's all that matters. But I'll tell you this, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Nobody. Mrs. was my kid. Nobody. Okay, so the homeless guy is technically my dad. My dad was only in my life actively from ages 0 to 7, and at that time gave me a ton of trauma. He was a hardcore alcoholic, manipulator, and a lot of other things that I cannot say. My mom, being the bad A she is, left him, and for a short bit we did weekends at his place. It was a never-ending cycle of him drinking, being a POS, and then buying us over with animals and gifts. After getting several DUIs, unpaid child support, and a few child endangerment cases, he got up and left to avoid going to jail. Like, disappeared. Left the animals locked in the house that he abandoned and shut off his phone. Every few months or so, he would randomly show up at my school drunk and crying with gifts in hand or leave notes on our door. My school literally had to implement a safety plan because my mom was scared he would take me. That stopped and I didn't hear from him for about 13 years. When I was 20, he messaged me on Facebook saying that he would love to get to know me and asking if there is anything I need financially. My initial response, sick to my stomach and crying, quickly turned to anger. I was broke and really could use the money. And I mean, like, he owed me, right? I told him that I would meet and needed money for rent. When I saw him, my stomach turned. He looked like the crazy guy you see on the side of the road begging for money. He really didn't make much sense. just talked a lot of stuff about my mom, saying she was a liar, and turned us against him and mumbling nonsense. Apparently his brother, my uncle that I have never had a relationship with, would no longer give him money but would wire transfer him money for me. He told his brother I needed $1,500 and told me that he would take $500 and give me $1,000. His crabby burner phone ran out of minutes, so one of the calls to his brother was made from my phone. Of course, he didn't have an ID or anything, so I would need to pick it up with him. When someone wires you money, they get a code, then give you the code, and voila, you get the money. My dad wouldn't give me the code until we were physically at the place to pick it up, which we planned to do the following morning. The next morning, I decided to text my uncle since I now had his number and ask him directly for the code. I got the code, picked up the money, and blocked my dad. He made sure to leave me some deranged voicemails about how big of a POS I am, and he pretty much used me to get money from his brother. If he really wanted to be in my life, he would have taken the proper steps to do so and change, but he never did. Not denying what I did wasn't bad, but also, screw my dad. Okay, so I'm an intern at the moment, and this happened to my supervisor, not me. So as a solicitor, in a rural southern county in the US, my boss has to deal with a number of interesting people. There was one case she worked on where a string of robberies occurred. Now the defendant was convicted and ordered to pay restitution. Now, one of the victims had estimated the majority of the items stolen, a TV, lawnmower, some tools and so on, as valued at $2,500 total, with the exception of an heirloom Rolex, which they were insistent they owned that was worth $10,000. Now this victim had been on the other side of the court case as a defendant many times, mostly related to drugs aka meth. Now they had absolutely no proof they even owned this watch and that the watch even existed. So my boss tried explaining to them that without proof, there is no way the judge is going to order the defendant to pay that large of an amount back to them. So they go to the sentencing and the judge orders the defendant to pay this victim the $2,500. Now the victim in open court addresses a judge and says, "What about my Rolex? It's a family heirloom worth $10,000 and $2,500 barely covers the other items. The defendant needs to pay me for everything and for my time too. I deserve $15,000 for all of this nonsense." The judge isn't very amused but does his job and informs the victim that they need to speak to the prosecutor to schedule a restitution hearing within 90 days to establish the value of the items lost, and he will make sure the defendant is ordered to pay what's owed. So the victim calls in the next day demanding that my boss set up the hearing as soon as possible. Now my boss is pretty busy as they are understaffed in a large county and suggests they schedule for the end of the month so they, the victim, and my boss have time to gather proof of the current value of the items lost. But nope, they were not having it. Screamed the prosecutor was incompetent and that the only reason they are getting their money is because a judge does his job, and that they won the case because the defendant pled guilty, and if it had gone to trial my boss would have let them walk, and that they will bring the proofs themselves, and that my boss was useless and all sorts of nonsense and bad words thrown in. So my boss relents and says the earliest that it can be done is next week, but the prosecutor's office would need the victim to come in today to sign some paperwork and advise them that they can have their own independent attorney present to make sure everything is understood. The victim comes down to the courthouse and my boss advises them of their rights to an independent attorney, that the burden of proof of value was on them, and just generally goes over everything once more. They sign the acknowledgement form and take a copy home. My boss then has to do everything in a rush to make sure the hearing is set on the judge's docket and gets the file they have from law enforcement ready to present. So comes court day and the victim goes before the judge and says the same thing as before, that they are due more than $2,500, that the Rolex was invaluable family heirloom worth at least $10,000, maybe more, and that they deserve compensation for their time and suffering and should be awarded $15,000. The judge then asks for the proof of value, and lo and behold, the victim has no real proof. They have a printed and stable's owner's manual to the TV they claim they owned and a remote, new, worth $800, and some receipts from Advanced Auto for the tools, about $150 new. A picture of them on the porch of the house where the break-in occurred was a rusted-out riding mower in the background, and a printed page from the internet of the mower new, value $1,200 new, and a handwritten document describing the Rolex and the ownership status belonging to the victim, all signed by their grandfather, and a picture printed from the internet of the alleged 10K watch. The defense attorney got to go next and had proof that the mower was still right where it was in the picture, and argued that the documentation of the TV and watch weren't real evidence of the ownership or current worth, and that the receipts from Advanced Auto only a few items held any value after purchase. The judge looks at the evidence and orders restitution to be paid $300 for the broken window that was in the prosecutor's report and for a few of the tools off of the Advanced Auto receipts, but denied any further payment as none of the victim's claims legit. This enraged the victim and they freaked out in court, screaming at the judge and throwing their chair and trying to flip the desk. The judge is not happy, orders them in contempt, and has a bailiff come remove them from the courthouse and orders a night in jail. At the jail they are searched and find a few grams of meth and a pipe with residue. This was a violation of their parole and they ended up serving time for their suspended sentence and for the drugs, about 2 years total. This took place years ago but still makes me laugh at the sheer stupidity of it all. It starts as all truly great sagas published on the internet begin, when I met a random guy through a friend at a bar in the city. Let's call the guy I met Mark for the purpose of this post. My friend had introduced me to Mark because for a few years leading up to that introduction, I shared an idea I had for a business with anyone who would listen. I was told Mark wanted to start his own business, had worked in the industry, knew a lot about the subject matter required, and thought my idea was good. Mark and I met up for lunch, we hit it off, and he said he'd start the business as a CEO and agreed to me taking a part-time operational role. I agreed to help solely in a part-time operational role because I couldn't afford to quit my day job. I put in 15% of the cash for 5% ownership since Mark was going to put in founder hours, 80 plus hours a week, and agreed to put up 85% of the cash, which was more money than I can afford to risk on a new venture. I worked part-time, I did what I said I would do, I even tried to be of assistance on things I had no experience with. I connected Mark with a fella I had done business with before, we will call him Paul. Paul and I got into a dispute ourselves. More on this later. Anyway, let's fast forward a few months and I go into a dispute with Mark over stationery. Yes, stationery not being to his liking caused him to flip out. This was despite him picking the stationery out. Next up, the contract I got from Mark was not what we agreed to. The legal work required a few months to get it done, and I had expected delays, but when I finally got it, the paperwork didn't represent what I had agreed to own. Not only that, but my investment wasn't being acknowledged under the terms we had committed to when I put the money in. Now, as I said, I was able to risk much, and I only invested what I could afford to lose. So this wasn't a huge sum of money. I didn't want to make a big deal about it since the amount was small, and he began promising a new contract when the business could pay for the lawyers to make changes. I signed nothing. Then it worsened. Mark and I started to fight anytime we were in a room together. As I think back, it's almost comical how angry he would get in my presence. I have other things to do with my time than squabble over stuff like stationery, so I worked on my areas of the business and hoped things would grow. I stopped in whenever I could and would help out regularly as needed with a little Mark interaction as possible. Paul would intervene sometimes when Mark would get particularly difficult to be around. Anyway, fast forward about 2 years and Mark can't help but tell everyone who will listen that the business is going well. I have no idea how well things are going because Mark isn't giving me any updates. I get a call around Christmas from Mark. He wishes me a happy holiday, then drops the bomb on me that he wants to terminate my involvement and refund my investment. I decline the investment refund and say that I am happy to no longer work with him. In my head, I think it's kind of hilarious that he thinks this will just end that easily, but I say nothing to that. According to him, Mark and I hang up with him aggravated about my refusal to take the refund on my investment. Mark then sent me an email that I had resigned. This had no basis in fact, but certainly was creative about what we had just discussed. I corrected him immediately in a reply stating that he wanted to no longer work together and that I can see that being the case, but want to discuss my investment. A few days later, Mark demands I come pick up a check for a reimbursement of my investment. I do not come and I do not get it. Next thing you know, the company attorney huffs and puffs and tries to scare me with some strongly worded letter. This is the same idiot attorney who screwed up my contract to work on a business and my investment agreement. Let's call this attorney Mr. Khan. For the sake of the story, I sent an email response to Mr. Khan that he screwed up. The company seems to be doing well, that I hear rumors about how well that I want to be on this for the foreseeable future, and I will not take a one-to-one cash out for what I put in. The attorney then emails me back, stating in writing that Mark never accepted my electronic transfer into the company account. Instead, Mark has another company he accepted the money into, a company I've never heard of, a company that is different from the name of the recipient on my electronic transfer, a company that would be committing wire fraud to accept the money I sent. On that note, I did some sleuthing online. I found out Mark had been forming one company every month or two. Then there were media reports and documents he let slip in shared drives he forgot I had access to from when we agreed to work together. Mark was too cheap and stupid to pay for tech help, so he was using my shared folders I had created, and I certainly wasn't obligated to turn out the shares if he wanted to work out of them. Those documents showed me Mark had recently raised money in the company I sent the payment to at 200 times the valuation I had bought into it at, and Mark didn't disclose my investment to the new investors. Mark had, however, put me on documents showing my ownership to previous investors, not on documents I had ever seen before, but documents he had been sending around. When I share my suspicions that Mark is committing wire fraud with Mr. Khan, I am told that I'm the one breaking the law by knowing anything about the investment documents the company has used. Mr. Khan tells me that by not picking up my check, I will not be entitled to any money and to contact law enforcement if I think something illegal has happened. He cautions, though, that I will be the one in trouble. Cue the malicious compliance. I let the different respective members of the Securities and Exchange Commission, along with the law enforcement, know what happened to me. I provided them with all of the documents I had from the matter. It took about 5 years for the investigation to conclude, for charges to be brought, and for a trial to conclude, and for Mark to go to jail. They say the government is slow, but they aren't kidding with just how slow. Maybe it was slow because Mark was running a large fraud. Tens of millions of dollars large. Anyway, Mark will be serving time for about 30 felony charges they found uncovering the details of his Ponzi scheme. He will be away for a long time. I never did anything wrong. With the information I was able to provide, Mr. Khan ended up getting disbarred. There were other things Mr. Khan did outside of what is shared in his post that I cannot share, or it could help to identify me to the folks involved. The investigators credited me with bringing the fraud to their attention. I gained an education, and I got to help bring down a crook. The sheer stupidity of Mark is that he didn't even follow the business plan I had. He just used it as a story to convince investors to give him money. It's a business model that works very, very well. It took a few more years, but I am now in a position to be pursuing this business full-time, with people of high integrity who all work together to ensure each other's success. We expect to have an extremely profitable year in 2023 after proving the business model worked in 2022. Okay, so slightly disingenuous title is I'm English and we don't have mall cops, just regular security guards. In my former life a few years ago now, I was a police officer here in good old England. I moved from a team dealing with action-packed 999 calls, speeding around in old Ford Focuses, or is it Focusy, and dealing with interesting things while working in a team that supported a large shopping complex. Shoplifting, antisocial behavior, real hard-hitting stuff. The uniform was a white shirt, black tie, and if I was out and about, a step vest over the top, with one of the big pointy hats too. If I was on a break though, I'd just put my normal jacket on to cover my shoulder numbers. This was mainly for personal security. So to a casual observer, I was just a bloke in a white shirt with a black tie. Cue the moment. I just finished dealing with the paperwork from a shoplifting and had a hankering for a sandwich. I locked my vest and head away but left my belt of tools. Can of spray, cuffs and metal stick. England, again. I left this belt on. I popped a plain black jacket over the top and ventured into the shopping complex in search of a footlong sandwich specified and acquired. I paid a well-known outlet and ambled to a seating area to mind my own business and chew down. Probably no less than 5 minutes later I clock a woman, the usual type, attempting to buy a sandwich. Now, from her big arm gestures I skillfully deduced she wasn't happy. That's not a crime, so back to my sandwich I went. Until of course, the voices became raised and the hand was slammed on a counter. I tucked the remnants of my sandwich in the bin and ambled over to see what the commotion was. Now working in the team I did, I was a known face in the center and I enjoyed the long sandwich. So the staff knew me and my job, so they relaxed a bit, which really irritated the woman. I quickly realized they didn't have the filling she wanted and she was refusing to take no for an answer. Is everything alright here? I ask. The woman turns and eyes me over. Now I'm in my early 20s at the time, so she takes me for a security guard. For God's sake, I don't need security. This little crap won't make my frickin' sandwich. Okay, firstly, you need to stop swearing. Secondly, I'm a level up from security. She didn't like this. Oh, piss off. I just want my sandwich. She ignores me and goes back to banging her hand on a desk and gesturing wildly at the team behind the counter. You need to stop that. She rounds on me again. I said piss off. I know the management here, so get lost back to standing around outside Debenhams or I'll get you sacked. I don't care. I'm warning you that you need to stop swearing because it's a public order offense. Or what? I just want my sandwich, not some jumped up plastic policeman interfering. Get lost. Stop swearing. You're causing a scene. Stop hitting that counter or you will be arrested. Don't tell me what to do. You're just a wannabe cop. You can't arrest me. Get me your boss now too. She was slamming her palms on a sneeze guard with each word and I think I've been patient enough at this point, so I unzipped my jacket to reveal that I'm in fact a uniformed police constable. Her eyes widen as she sees the cuffs on my belt. Nope, I'm arresting you under Section 5 of the Public Order Act. The arrest is necessary to prevent injury to others and damage to property. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defense, and so on. Now, I had no intention of cuffing her. I was twice her size, so not necessary. Instead, I steered her, spluttering, to a table and sat her down as I called for a car to pick us up. After another 30 minutes of her refusing to believe she'd done anything wrong, I eventually gave her a penalty notice to dispose of the matter. So her non-sandwich swear fest ended up costing her £80 instead. First post here, so apologies for any mistakes. This is not my story, but rather a relative's. She's a teacher, and it was the end of a semester, so she had to turn in some reports to her head of department. For some reason, the head of department guy, let's call him H, wanted the reports to be turned in by submitting a USB to his desk. Security reasons, he said. Well, she used the MacBook for work and it doesn't have any USB ports. So, it's really inconvenient for her to transfer files via USB. Still, H insisted on her bring in a USB containing the relevant files and reports to his office. So she brought her MacBook and a USB to his office. She showed him the lack of USB ports on her device. It would be easier if I just email you the files. since I cannot plug a USB into my laptop, she told him. Yet H still insisted. Sending files via email isn't secure enough. Can't you find a way to get your files on a USB? Cue malicious compliance. Okay, let me borrow your computer, H. He lent her his device, which has USB ports. She emailed the file to him, downloaded the file to his device, plugged her USB in, then put the file into her USB. Here is your USB with a report, sir. She said after working silently for a while. Why try to explain when he refused to listen? And you can just prove your point with action, right? H got the USB, plugged it into his computer, and then realized what she borrowed his computer for. You might as well just send me the file. Why go through the loop? He asked her, to which she replied, perfectly serious, you told me to get my reports on a USB, so I did that. Anyways, after that incident, another teacher, who had a similar name to my relatives, and H kept mixing up the two teachers, submitted her reports, and the poor lady got an earful on how to properly use a USB to transfer files and blah blah blah. H was salty but couldn't say anything because, well, she was just following his instructions.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.